Okay. Wonderful. And here we go. And once again, hello and welcome to Auspol Explained. Is this one working? I feel old every time I do on YouTube. I used to live stream for a job with different software, entirely different software, and so it makes me feel terrible. But this should be going, I believe. I should be chatting to you right now. Hello, Sir Hardhead. I'm going to do this super fun thing where I'm going to just like move away from like on my laptop I've got me open. I'm going to just do this fun thing to switch my own account. Things seem to be working. Wonderful. Welcome. 3 years. 3 years of Auspol Explained. That's the point. We're getting to that. 3 years of Auspol Explained. It is here. It happened. Thank you very much to everyone. To just being here, supporting the channel, and everything. And I'm just gonna do a little thing where I'm like, 3 years of Auspol. Yes, good. I am rolling. Wonderful. So, hello to everyone. Hello to you, Penciled Ink. Just did your first day of work experience in Parliament House. You got to meet Anthony Albanese. Wonderful. That's so cool. I want to meet Anthony Albanese. I want to meet many people. To be honest, I just love the idea of meeting members of Parliament. 3 years, that's right. Auspol Explained outlived the Whitlam government. Not simultaneously, but another thing that happened in November the 5th is when 1975 is when the Whitlam government went down. That's not a fun start to the chat, but yes, 3 years, another 15, and this channel will be able to vote, or maybe 13 years. Who knows? New Zealand, I believe, has just brought up the possibility of legislating reforms so that like 16-year-olds could vote. Are we actually live, Daniel? You tell me. Can you actually hear me? Is the question. Because you're the one telling me if I'm live or not. Is it actually... tell me it's working. Please, tell me it's working. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of dropped frames. Come on, YouTube. You tell me. You tell me. Okay. Neat. Just looking at the stream health on that. There's 2 screens, one of which tells me things, the other one does not tell me many things at all. Thank you. Congratulations to me. Excellent. Thank you. It is very rewarding. It's also very time consuming. I have a day job. This is not my job. Making Auspol Explained. I don't understand that comment. Yes, this is a lot of effort, really, to make content frequently. I used to be doing this fortnightly when I started, and now I do it monthly. And even then, I'm like, I released an episode. Oh, good, a break. And then a week passes, and I'm like, oh, if I don't start thinking about it now, it's not going to get done in time. And then 3 weeks later, I'm like, how did I ever stick with this? I have ADHD. It's just been 3 years of being like, that was a good job that I did. And then waiting for the deadline to roll around and then being like, oh no! And then doing it again. So yes, I was starting this out. I genuinely thought that maybe I would not do it for 3 years, simply because I thought that it would potentially just not work very well. But no, I've did it. I managed it. Also interested as to why. I've just noticed that it says stop streaming and go live. What's the... Now it says end broadcast and stop streaming. Is streaming and live a different thing? Have I... Oh, I hate YouTube so much. Okay, I am live. Good. So, what are your questions? What would you like to know? It's not just me being like, wow, we did it. Like, hey, let's chat, let's talk. Victorian state election is coming up soon. I did not do a video summarising the different positions to do with that because I was like, that's so much effort. And yeah, I genuinely do not have the time, unfortunately, to do like what I did for like the federal parliament, federal election, which is unfortunate. Like, pardon me, it's a big thing. It's important for people to know what is going on at any point in time. And yeah, Victoria, it's your time to vote. But in lieu of me, there are plenty of other political sources and commentary things that will allow you to stay up to date. Like, I've been listening to the Tally Room recently just to catch up on like some of the Victorian state issues and like what's actually going on there. It's fascinating that like one of the issues is something to do with like a public transport. I feel like I'm going to butcher this, like a rail link, and the estimates for cost on that are massive, and I think that's fascinating because interestingly, state governments really like deliver on these sorts of services. Like, they deliver on infrastructure projects and services, and public transport is their domain. And like that's what they do. But there is what we call a vertical fiscal imbalance, where the states have limited taxation powers. So a lot of money is controlled by the federal government, who then gives like money to the state to like fulfill the promises that they have to deal with, like managing hospitals, for example. Managing hospitals is a state responsibility. Medicare, the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, that is a federal responsibility, but the money for hospitals that the states have to manage and look after, and like emergency services, this is a large amount of it federally sourced. So like Dan Andrews' Labour is the one that's like, let's build this big old public transport infrastructure thing, and it'll cost lots and lots, and the people of Victoria are not all collectively paying for it. A lot of Australia is paying for it collectively, because that's the point of a central federal government, is to be able to provide the funds for states to do their individual things. So it's just interesting to like look at that, and you really oversimplify it when you're trying to like distinguish between state and federal responsibilities, because it's like, state looks after all these things because the federal helps them with it, and there's a lot of back and forth there. So Perfect Cipher says federal parliament should have a staff of full-time therapists for members and staff. Yay and nay. Yay. Yes, especially federal. I mean, like, any parliament really is a difficult job. A lot of people have this idea that it's very lazy, and it's... I wouldn't say it is. I mean, there are definitely some members who don't put in nearly as much effort as others, but, like, when you're travelling to federal parliament back and forth, like, from the other side of the country, like, all over, that's a lot of travel, that's a lot of time away from family, and friends, and really disruptive to your life. Whether you actually do anything in the chamber, as long as you're just showing up, that's still like a big disruption to your life. So yeah, there definitely should be support for members in general. They probably do have support. Like I don't know the intricacies of what is supplied to members at federal parliament, but I do know that there is like counselling services, for example, in like the West Australian State Parliament for staff, like, and also like, hey, here's like ways that you can help with your physical health. There's important ways that people need to look after themselves, and there are definitely benefits to members in some way. I'm sure that helps them, but still, overall, lots of travel, which is why I don't want to be a member of parliament. If I was ever to be a member of parliament, which I'm probably not going to be, it would be state level, because I live in a capital city, so I would be able to, like, me traveling to work would be traveling a reasonable distance. Yeah. Interesting. Got a troll in the chat. Anyway, I think it's time to start beef with friendly Geordies. Please, no. We're not gonna do that. No, he has way too many fans, and I don't want them to spam me or get annoyed at me. I'm just gonna tweet that I'm live. Not that I have Twitter. Twitter is garbage. I just don't use it. Yes. Ask because you're like, hey, you need your psychologist in training. That's great. That's good. Definitely need more mental health professionals in the world in general. It's such a vastly important part of everyone's lives, especially recently. Asks, what are my Victorian election predictions? Probably a Labour win. Though unsure if it is a going to be a minority government or majority government. Like I've seen a couple polls. It's interesting where like the vote collectively for the major parties declines. We've seen that with the federal, but still, like, even when you've got this decline thanks to preferential voting, right? So long as you don't dip down into like third place, the major parties have a really good run for their money, like for coalition versus Labour. But like, who knows? Like, honestly, Victoria is one of those interesting ones where Greens actually get lower house seats. So there is the vague possibility of Labour losing enough seats to go into minority, but then also then like Greens being able to give them a majority pretty comfortably. They would have to lose a lot to go into majority, because there was the Dan slide, because we love our little puns, the Dan slide in 2018. Like, other than that, it's very difficult to predict. One, because like that's elections are always difficult to predict, but also like I live in Western Australia, so I'm not like super like plugged in to the social attitudes, but then again, like, you're only really plugged into the social attitudes of the place that you're in, and Victoria is a large place. So yeah, from what I've read, the polls suggest Labour victory. They don't necessarily suggest the strong Labour victory. Yeah, who knows? Victoria is interesting in that like it's a pretty progressive state. Like, Labour has won all but like 2 or 3 elections since 1981. Didn't used to always be like that. So like the Liberals really have very little time in government, and also like the presence of Greens in the lower house, the Legislative Assembly, that's quite uncommon. They, as a minor party, they would naturally find more like footing in an upper house because of the quota system instead of the like 50% single member electorate system of the Legislative Assembly or House of Representatives. Like for the longest time federally, it's been 1 or 0 Greens. But like when you have drop in major party primary votes, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a drop in major party seats overall. Because we could just have preference votes flow back. But then again, maybe the Greens will pick up some seats. Maybe the coalition will pick up some seats. And then you'll just eat into Labour in both ends. Or maybe Labour will pick up some Liberals. I'm very interested to find out. And there's less than a week until the election. Aside from I live here, so I have to, what made me so deeply interested in politics beyond the usual talking points and into the mechanics and history? I'm a big nerd. So I was actually like, I was like, that's it. Groomsmaid. Sorry, yeah. I was like, which half of the... Okay, so I actually had at my wedding, my groomsmaid Joni had a party like years back in 2013, an election watching party, and I did not care about politics, and I was just going there for fun. To be social, and then everyone was just like interested and talking about it and analyzing it, and I was like, oh, okay, interesting. So then after that, I just read the news and kept up with like what Tony Abbott was doing, and been like, okay, well, this is interesting, this is important, the decisions that are happening are affecting a lot of people, and like then I just, the more that I spent time looking at it, the more I just got more and more interested and fixated and like hyper fixated on it. And then it just snowballed from there. Like it literally just kept picking up steam until you see the person before you. Like it was a casual thing that I just devoted so much time to the point where it's like, I want to learn so much. I love trivia. I love learning things. And so I started collecting all that you can see behind you is political biographies. That's Pokemon. But that bookshelf is political biographies. Yeah, so... that's just years and years of... and then, it's just became like... The basics are so important. Like, you can understand a lot about policy, but not if you don't understand like the mechanics of the system, you still feel disenfranchised. Like the differences between like the upper house and the lower house. So like the Senate and the House of Representatives, or Legislative Council and Legislative Assembly. Like people will think like, there's no point in voting for anyone but a major party, for example, or like if they live in a safe area, they feel like their vote doesn't count. Even if they do vote for a major party, they're like, but the other major party always wins. And this sort of like lack of understanding of how like voting works, or swings and whatnot, is not useful. It breeds apathy and disengagement and doesn't provide an environment for accurate results when it comes to democratic expression. And a key thing is understanding there are two chambers, unless you live in Queensland, Northern Territory, or the ACT, for their state parliaments. So, like, it's like, okay, well, I might not be able to get the person I want elected into the lower house, because that's a single member electorate, and this person won't get more than 50% of the votes. Still vote for them anyway, because that's my honest expression. But then the upper house, with multi-member electorates, you get a broader, diverse representation of like the minutiae of people, and that's really when like your vote really can shine, if you're the kind of person that votes for someone who won't necessarily win a seat in the lower house in your area, be that a major party or a minor party or independent, and really understanding like that is an important mechanism, that you are still empowered, and how preferences work. Like that's, I feel if you understand at least that, you can at least feel a little bit more enthused about the political system, because you understand at the very least how you can be part of it in more ways than just, well, I'll vote for this party, and if they win government, yay. If they don't, everything is ruined. That's not how it works. What are the negatives and positives in a world where most people are party members in Australia? That's an interesting question. Also, just like, let me ponder that as I post on various social medias to try and get people to join this live stream. Positives and negatives. Well, look, a party structure is useful for like gathering resources and using them in different places to promote an idea or person. Like, you know, if you were like an independent in like a regional area, for example, you'd either have to work really hard to get to know a lot of people over a large area, or, you know, have a lot of, I mean, you still have to work very hard, but like money would be a thing that would greatly benefit your campaign. But if you were a political candidate from a party in a regional area, you can access resources from party funds to help your campaign and that brand awareness, and that allows you to get elected. And the important part of understanding how parties work is that they are made out of people. So like the Nationals dedicate themselves to like regional areas, for example. So you're going to get people who live in regional areas, whereas like Liberals, you're going to see significantly less of that. But as a coalition, right, you're bringing a bunch of people that live in regional areas into the same party room as a bunch of people that live in metro areas, and when they discuss and debate and come up collectively with some kind of policy platform, you're bringing in views from multiple different areas. And the same happens in like the Labour Party. If there was no one in a regional area elected in Labour, they would not have the people to bring forward perspective and ideas and real life knowledge of rural areas to help them formulate policy for that. Not to say that they wouldn't formulate policy for regional areas, but you would expect them to not be able to think as effectively about what rural areas need compared to if they had a bunch of people in from rural areas in the party room, and vice versa, right? So like if the cities abandoned Labour en masse and it was just country people who voted for Labour, all of a sudden you're going to have a bunch of people that don't live in cities who are like, how would we create legislation for cities areas? And so party structures just give that like communal space in the party room to discuss that idea, and also provide resources to promote people from all different regions. But also then it really, like, especially now, is this sort of limiting in how you act as an individual on the actual parliament floor, if you're in a party. Now, like, Labour, for example, really strict about not crossing the floor. Liberals, less so, but it, like, the party whip, the organisational person, really wants them to vote the way that the party has decided. So that is, like, a big thing. And so, like, I feel like a lot of people's frustration with party politics is the idea that they just go along with the party, which is a bit of, I mean, they do, because they have to, but also that is a choice that they've made. And also, once again, going along with the party, that's the step that comes after the people have already gotten into that party room and brought the views from different parts of Australia together and discuss that as, like, what should the party collectively think about or agree with. And so it still does like limit how they can vote, like because they want to do that in a uniform way to show solidarity. So there are pros and cons. Like another pro is that it clearly makes it very easy to understand who is actually forming government. If you don't have any political parties, someone can still be premier, someone can still be prime minister. Like it is a collective decision as to who they would follow, and who would command what we call like confidence in the House, right? And the governor or governor general can appoint independents to be the leader of the government, even if there is not a party to be the government party. Like if parties didn't exist, so really, like, you could just have, I mean, Parliament is these collective decision-making processes and discussions. Just having the party room as a separate thing just provides a space to make it efficient in some cases. But again, if we didn't have any political parties, I'm sure people would find a way to simulate things like a party room and have that efficiency in some other way. It really is, yeah. It's just a way that we do it. We don't have to do it that way, and it can be done differently, and there is not going to be worse if we abandon the party system, but it's also not inherently bad if we keep political parties. I've talked for too long, and now I have actually finally fallen behind on questions. How do we appeal to government for this? Do you think an over-reliance on government over local communities is dangerous? That's so broad. I want to tell you about committees. It's important to understand, like, one, the distinction between the different levels of government. Also, like, the usefulness of government in, like, small ways. Like, you know, you go to local governments or, like, state governments and be like, hey, this, like, park just needs, like, more infrastructure or whatever. That's not, like, a big legislative process or change. That's just a thing that members can act on. So that's definitely useful. But also, like, broad understanding, committees is a thing where members of different political parties get together in a room to examine topics and discussions, like a committee on health or a committee on education, committee examining a specific topic on, like, say, workplace harassment, and they examine it for 12 months, and then write a final report and disband. And the way that they do this is they need to do hearings and have public submissions, and like, this is when a lot of, like, you know, either community submissions or interest groups, lobbies, etc. could come in and provide this kind of information. And so you say, like, you can't really fully separate the reliance on the community and government as, like, two fully separate entities. Absolutely, we should have, like, non-legislative communities working together to rely on each other and help in many ways. But also, don't underestimate how you, as a member of the community, can get involved. Either that be, like, as an individual, or, like, forming an interest group made up of people in the community that represent a specific interest of that community, and then doing that kind of lobbying to ministers, members, or committees. Like, do that. Like, you don't need to be in Parliament. None of you need to be in Parliament, but some of you could be. But, like, definitely get together. I really want you to be like, okay, if there is something super important to you, form a group or whatnot. Like, sign a petition. Look at a committee that might be relevant to this and, like, contact them. Yeah. Anthony Green has some strong opinions about group ticket voting, saying that it's undemocratic. Do I also have strong opinions? Yes. I try not to. I try not to have many strong opinions on this channel because obviously I want to get as accessible to as many different people as possible. But the answer is group ticket voting is not a good system. It's bad. It does not work, and that is the reason why almost every single place in Australia that has ever had it has gotten rid of it, with the exception of Victoria. I read an article like months and months ago where they're like, could we get rid of group ticket voting? And like I think it was being examined by a committee or something. And they're like, we don't think that we will have enough time to legislate to get rid of this in time for the next election. And look, they haven't. So for those who don't know how group ticket voting works, basically, right, for an upper house system, so it used to be in the Senate, but also for like the Legislative Council, you are electing multiple people across a region or area. So for the Senate, that's 6 people in your state. Or Victoria, for example, there's 8 regions with 5 people each in them, I believe, that form the Legislative Council. And so you have the option of voting above or below the line. Below the line is the bit where you put in numbers for a bunch of people, individual people that are like aligned under the parties. In Victoria, you only have to put 5 numbers down, I think it is. Double check that with the VEC. Put in a bunch of numbers, please, the minimum at least. For the Senate, it used to be every single box until they changed that. And in WA, it used to be every single box until they changed that, which meant that you could be filling in 70, 80 boxes. Group ticket voting was a way to simplify that. So above the line, instead of like a list of candidates for every single party, there is just the party itself. So you have, Labour, Liberals, Nationals, Greens, Daylight Savings, which was the WA one, and I think they have that in Victoria. Transport Matters, something like that in Victoria. Liberal Democrats, One Nation, etc. And to make it really simplified, so people who don't really want to vote, but they're like, I'll come and do this. To make it really simple for them, you just put a 1, right? So that helps people vote a little bit more because it's really, really simple instead of having to have lots of numbers and think about like individual people. But like the way it works, so say like you put 1 on like a micro party, that's not going to get elected, right? They need to get like 1/6 of the vote. It's not going to get that via primary votes, right? Well, you haven't put in any preferences, so all the parties, they come up with preference flows for where that vote goes, and then the micro parties and minor parties, they get together and do a bunch of deals where they're like, okay, this flows here and this flows here, and like we'll like exchange things, and so people are still like democratically expressing their opinion that they like this party the most, but as then fails to get a seat because they don't have enough votes, it is then up to that party to decide where that vote goes, which you can look up in advance, but also if you're going to put in the effort of looking it up in advance, surely you would probably think about like, hey, who do I actually want to put in my ballot? And like the moment you like vote below the line, these preference deals cease to exist. They no longer have any control over your preferences because you've given them. And the flaw with this is that it means that parties that get like 1% of the vote, or even less than 1% of the vote, get elected because, 0.5% of people voted for micro-party A, 0.6 for this one, 0.4 for this one, right? And then, of course, because they're also incredibly unpopular, they'll get knocked out of the count. All their preferences from above the line get counted and flow towards another micro-party that also got 0.7 or 1% of the primary vote, but everything else below them got so knocked out and flowed to them that they get a seat. So you get a really broad mix of minor parties and micro-parties, some of them very specific, niche, like Daylight Savings Party in Western Australia that got 98 primary votes, but because of preference flows and deals, Wilson Tucker got elected. I'm just criticizing daylight savings. I'm sorry, I'm just criticizing group ticket voting, not Wilson Tucker himself. I've said hello to him a couple of times. He seems fine. I don't know his policies particularly intimately well, but he does show up to work and he does engage in debates. He actually flew back to Australia, Western Australia, to take up the seat that he unexpectedly won. So he is doing his job. He is doing that, and that is good, because he should. Group ticket voting, on the other hand, should not exist. So it's just an odd system, that you just get, like, you get representation of parties that otherwise wouldn't, and I'm all for, like, a diverse view of views in Parliament. Like, that's the point of representative democracy. I just want it to be representative in a more proportional way, where the people that actually got voted in more get more of the votes and seats. So, like, say for example that you are, like, what is 1/6 of the, 16.66%. Okay, so the idea is that you would need 16.66 recurring percent, I think, to get a quota, right? So say you are a party that has a candidate with 11% of the vote. And then a bunch of micro parties get kicked out of the vote because they've got so few. None of them are going to make a quota, and in fact, collectively, all their votes don't fulfill a full quota of 16 point whatever percent. But there is enough preference flows to get 12 or 13% to a micro party that got 1% of the primary vote. That means that even though, like, way more people thought this is the party that we want, like, specifically, and put, like, their first vote on, is the decisions of vastly different people who didn't vote for the one who micro won, and that one got elected instead of the other one. So you get this weird mix of just parties that outperform, just really in rare cases, parties that are far more popular than them. And this is a system that gets exploited, really, with preference deals. It shouldn't happen like that. You should be able to express your vote how you want, which you can by doing it below the line. Victoria, thankfully, does not make you fill in every single box. Fill in as many as you feel like, but yeah, it is, like, not a good system. Yeah. Anyway, whoop. Gosh, okay. Thank you, everyone, for congratulating me on 3 years. Perfect Cipher, you can't stand for federal parliament because of dual citizen, but some state parliaments, I don't know how many, I know that WA, because I live here, I know that WA allows you to have dual citizenship and run for parliament. So if you do actually feel like running for parliament, but you don't want to get rid of your dual citizenship, I recommend looking into state eligibility requirements. Have I? No, I have not played Disco Elysium. Any advice for a fellow YouTuber seeking to grow an audience? It's go on TikTok. That's a really frustrating thing, is that, like, you get other social media platforms to promote the other social media platform that you already have. Like, yeah, it's yeah, good thumbnails. Think about, like, the wording of things. Like, I try and occasionally word Auspol Explained videos as to something, like, that's like a phrase that someone might, like, Google search to try and find an answer to a question. Just find your niche, promote it in some way, get people to share. The most important thing is to actually get community engaged, like, people engaging and caring about your videos. So if you like this, if you like any of the past 3 years and you want to see another 3, share my YouTube videos. And also maybe check out whoever this person is and see if they cares about people engaging, and that involves commenting and sharing and subscribing. Yes, thank you. Obligatory Subway appreciation post. I actually went to Subway recently. You can finally think about enjoy that one. This is not going to be interesting to most people, but me and Dan have a little in-joke. Yes, I went to Subway recently. I got a smashed falafel with Italian herbs and cheese, toasted, full 12 inches, and then cheddar cheese, lettuce, tomato, cucumber, carrot, and olives with smoky barbecue sauce, no salt or pepper, thank you, and no cookie. And there you have it. Finally, you have my Subway order after asking me or commenting about it for so long. That's right, we're going that niche in terms of answering your questions or comments. Do these micro-parties actually have much sway with the larger parties that their votes get funneled into micro-parties? Because the moment you funnel it towards a major party, gets eaten. It's gone. It's not going to go anywhere else, almost certainly. So it is like it doesn't need to be that way. Like a bunch of micro-parties could deliberately preference like Labour or Liberal second, and use that as a way to funnel votes towards them. But because they are micro parties, they tend to have all sorts of different ideas and views, and maybe very niche, and they exist because Labour and Liberal aren't focusing on the issues that they are. They tend to then just try and support other micro parties, which doesn't need to be. So but otherwise, like, no, they don't have a sway in what those parties do. Once the parties are elected, they can champion the policies that they got elected on, whether they got elected on via lots of primary votes or lots of preferences. Hi Kyle, yes, I have played the new Pokemon game. I like it. Shame about like the graphics and the textures and the lag and the fact that it's buggy, but other than that, I'd love it because I love Pokemon so much. It's my other love besides politics. This is a bunch of Pokemon manga. There's so many cool, cute Pokemon. It's weird that they're so small, like in game. Like you're just walking along, you're like, "Oops, I've tripped over a poor me," and then you're just in a battle. You're like, "Ah." Yes. Also fun and interesting that it's just like open world, and you'd be like, "I'm gonna go do this. I'm gonna go do that." Just to the point where you just like wander too far, and you're like, "Okay, this is too hard now." I was like, "Oh, I don't have to go to a gym immediately." And then it got to the point where my Pokemon just stopped obeying me. I'm like, "Oh yeah, there's level caps. I need to actually go to a gym, and actually play that part of the game." Yes, so yes, I love Pokemon a lot. Is the answer to that question. Interesting. Everyone just ignore Ben. He thinks the Liberals are communists. Classic Ben Chesterman. Ha ha ha. Trolling me. I hope he realizes, understands that going back and watching my old videos again and again, and then commenting nonsense things about communists counts as engagement to the algorithm, and only boosts my videos more. 3 years, even though all signs point to you really hating me and refusing to understand anything I say. But good on you, champ, for consistently being just a fan and promoting my channel with just all sorts of things and comments. It's really rewarding to have such a dedicated hater not understand how algorithms work and boost your engagement again and again and again, much to the detriment of their intention. Neat, thanks Ben. Thoughts on wards versus single ticket upper house voting? Good question, Sugar Swag Lord. Remember when we all said swag? Yes. Like it's a good question. Thoughts on like wards or like regions versus like the entire area. I suppose like there's different ways that you would do an upper house. Like WA, and Victoria, currently regional. In 2025, Western Australia is not going to have regions at all. It's going to be voted on across the entire state. 37 members on like have to be elected on a single ballot. Currently, though, it is 6 members per 6 regions for 36 total. New South Wales does like the whole state to create its upper house. Victoria has regions, and like when you do the entire state, based off like how many people need to get elected via a single vote, the quota gets smaller. So you get very proportional and representational. Like you get a very big mix, basically. So like Western Australia's 2021 election, for example, right, with these regions, even though like statewide overall, Greens got a lot more votes than like Nationals or legalized cannabis. They got one seat in the entire chamber, the Legislative Council, because those votes were like enough in this region to get a quota, and then you cross over this border and there is not enough votes, even though there's a lot, to get a quota, and then you finally like it centralized enough votes in one spot to get Dr. Brad Pettit elected to the Legislative Council, but then you get like legalized cannabis, who has 2 members, and they got 22,000 votes across the state or something, and it's not proportional, right? They're still there. They're allowed to be there because they got voted in, definitely by a larger margin than some other people. But once you're there, the point is do the job. So what you're going to do, what 2025 will see, for example, is more Greens because simply they have more votes than other parties. But also what you will see is some other parties that might get a single seat because the threshold for a quota is a lot smaller, and you wouldn't do that in the way that you would get with group ticket voting, where like people with tiny amounts of votes get in because other people with tiny amounts of votes got knocked out, and then did preference deals. Like you'd still get people with tiny amounts of votes getting knocked out and their preference going to another party that got tiny amounts of votes, but that would be solely based off the actual preferences ticked on by the voter, not a preference deal. The Nationals are not the biggest fan of this happening because Western Australia doesn't have a big regional population. The whole point of the regions was to create and enshrine regional representation by having 3 regional regions and 3 metro regions. Even though like Western Australia has 2.6 million people, and 2 million of that is in Perth. So you're going to get a very different upper house, but you're also going to get like a very proportional upper house that has still a mix of minor parties and small parties as well, but probably less Nationals. But then again, you don't know. I don't know that. I can't predict that for certain, because then also like they're not bound by regions as they were before. So like they could get like a regional person who dedicates campaigning to like Carnarvon, and a regional person who gets dedicated campaigning to Broome, and a dedicated Central Wheatbelt campaigner, and get a quota based off this specific area and familiarity without having to campaign the entire state. New South Wales, they have a way bigger regional population compared to Western Australia. Like it isn't just like 2/5 of the population is in Sydney, and so the way that like voting across the entire state works is it still allows regional areas to have a lot more representation in the upper house without having a region or area having its own dedicated list of seats, because so many more people live there. And, you know, Queensland, if it had an upper house chamber, which it doesn't, could also vote across the entire state, and it would be fine for regions and rural towns, because so many people live in regional areas in Queensland that Nationals were actually larger than the Liberal Party. That's why they fused, because it was beneficial to the Liberals to be like, help. So that's that's the big difference, really. The way, like, it works, where you have dividing the state into regions or areas versus voting across the entire state, really just depends on how many people you have living in those regional areas, those country areas, as to how your upper house looks. And you can see the value of having dedicated seats just for country areas versus, like, not, depending on how many people live there. So we'll see what it looks like in 2025, and then we can form more opinions and campaign differently if you're not happy with how it works. But I'm fascinated to see how it is going to go. Yeah. I gave a lot of time to that. I love talking for so long and then not being able to catch up on questions. Okay. Does WA even have the population? WA doesn't have much of a regional population, but it does have some. It's very large, to be honest. Western Australia's a very large place. There's also like a royalties for regions system where money gets put into regional areas, and I hope that they continue to improve and grow, because, you know, that's, people should be able to have plenty of infrastructure and support in regional areas, and people should have options as to where they could live alternatively other than capital cities. Why is the Northern Territory not a state? So the fun fact, Northern Territory used to be part of a state. It used to be South Australia. South Australia used to be the entire middle. So states have, like, constitutionally enshrined protections and rights because the states wrote the Constitution, whereas territories are administered by the Commonwealth. So that's just land that the Commonwealth gets to choose what it does with. And so South Australia was like, oh, barely anyone lives up there, so they tried to, like, sell some land and get people to move up. And then people got really angry. They're like, you haven't surveyed this properly. It's not good farming land. There's crocodiles. It's dry. We don't like it. They tried to get some money back off the South Australian government. South Australian government was like, oh, goodbye. Gave Northern Territory, created the Northern Territory by giving that land to the Commonwealth to look after. And there are so few people in the Northern Territory that they risked losing one of their 2 seats in the House of Representatives. And that is a massive impediment to statehood. It could become a state. It could, in theory. But the original states all get 12 senators. They all get the same amount of senators. But the rule is that the Commonwealth gets to choose what representation a territory gets. So it wasn't until the 70s that the Northern Territory actually had its own parliament to govern itself, and it is not constitutionally enshrined or protected to have the 2 senators that it has. And those 2 senators don't have 6-year terms either. They are linked to the House of Representatives. So if it were to become a state, the federal government could then still, on top of that, choose how many senators it gets. Like, it doesn't have it won't necessarily have equal standing as the original 6. It wouldn't automatically get 12. That would be incredibly disproportional, of, like, nearly 200,000 people. I think it's even less that are actually, like, voters in the Northern Territory, electing 6 senators every half election, 12 total, compared to New South Wales. The Senate is meant to be disproportional to protect states from being overrun by larger states. But it was like, hey, if you want to be a state, 3 senators? That's more. And it's like, that's so less. It's really in part just the impediment is that no one lives in the Northern Territory compared to other places. And that is just difficult for it to get political representation, because that's not many people to actually create seats. Again, maximum 2 seats, and even then, that's not proportional to other places. It's not a state because, it would be so disproportional, and also then, like, the federal government wouldn't give it the equal representation that others do. More people should live in the Northern Territory. It's a wonderful place, and really, if you build up the population, you build up the tax base, you build up the ability to create infrastructure and supply things, and if you get enough people to have 3 seats in the House of Representatives, you have more advocates for your area in terms of federal government grants and consideration. So it's sad. I think the Northern Territory deserves better. I don't know if the Northern Territory should become a state. I just think that it should. I'm not opposed to it becoming a state. I just haven't thought of really in depth of whether or not it should or shouldn't. Just more of that it isn't, and it's difficult for it. But I really hope that more people live in Northern Territory, and it just gets more infrastructure, and just becomes a more well represented space in general. What's not a politics question, was a book/show that I like? Good question. I've been reading a lot of political biographies. A show that I like, Andor, is really good, the latest Star Wars. We're not going to change the way that the Senate works, Kazmak, because you'd need constitutional reform, which requires a referendum to change Senate representation and how it all works. But the idea of the Senate is that it is the state's chamber, so you would not alter the boundaries in which members get elected, because the members get elected per state to represent the state as a whole. That is constitutionally how it is designed and its purpose. So it would be incredibly difficult to alter how the Senate, the areas in which you would vote for senators. The only thing that really changes is numbers of senators. It is, as practical as possible, half the seats in the House of Representatives. So if we lose 1 seat in the House of Representatives or gain 1, we're not going to change the amount of senators. But in the past, the House of Representatives used to be something like 75 or 76 people before a massive increase. So the Senate was half that. So if we want to, it's really just changing how many people are in the Senate. That's the thing that would change over time. Super Swag Lord, bring in the tricameral idea. How would that work? What is the third chamber for? Speaking of tricameral systems, let's nip this myth in the bud. The Indigenous Voice to Parliament is not a third chamber. It's not a tricameral system. It's not a third chamber. It doesn't have any legislative power. That is not the point. It never will be the point. Cannot possibly be the point. Some people claim falsely that it's a third chamber and therefore are opposed to it. You're allowed to vote no in the referendum coming up. If you vote no because you think it's a third chamber, you have been misinformed. It is not a third chamber. It's not a tricameral system. It does not have legislative power. It is a constitutionally enshrined recognition of Indigenous Australians as the first custodians, but also an advisory body to provide feedback and reports to Parliament for it to act on its own discretion in the aims of helping it create better outcomes and legislation that affects Indigenous people. So annoyed when people say that it's a third chamber. It's not. Malcolm Turnbull says that in his memoir. He has since publicly retracted that because he looked at it and was like, actually, no, what I said was wrong. Thank you, Malcolm Turnbull. Should have probably thought of that before you put that in your book. But yeah, also he said that without there actually being a proposal for specifics, because is it Ken Wyatt never actually got round to being that far in the process that Labour currently is in proposing a referendum on an Indigenous Voice. So his comments earlier when he said, "Oh, that would amount to a third chamber," were based off assumptions of something that isn't actually what's on the plate, on the table for the public coming up in the next year or whenever. So we can be a little bit lenient on him being completely wrong, especially because he has since apologized and retracted for being wrong. So good on you, Malcolm Turnbull, for admitting that. Yeah. Whoop, okie dokie. Okie dokie. Sorry. How would a person set up their own political party? Paperwork. So there is an amount of people that you need to agree to be members. Not like members of parliament, but like members that like, yeah, we are part of this group. I think you need like a party constitution. Like you need to like a rule list, like a rule book or something. Like some element of proving that you have a formal party structure. Depends on which, like, if you're trying to register state or federal, like there are different requirements. So like in Victoria, I think it's like 500 people need to sign up to say, yeah, we're members of this party before it can be registered. Federally, I believe they changed it to like 1,500 or something. Yeah, and then you fill in some paperwork with either the Australian Electoral Commission if you want to register federally, or the relevant Electoral Commission of the state that you're in, or territory. So that'd be the Victorian Electoral Commission, Northern Territory Electoral Commission, etc. I don't know what fees there are, but yes, you can't just, as an individual, say, I have my own political party. You, like, otherwise, like, just a ton of people would just register just a million parties that are just supported literally just by themselves, and make the ballot untenable. You have to actually, so if you want to, like, I want to make the eating books party, you need to go around and find 500 or 1,500 people that would sign a thing, sign a membership form and say, yes, we also want to eat books, and that to be a political party. Admittedly, not the best idea. You might have trouble with that. But if you're like the Climate Action Now party or whatever, that's something that people would be passionate about and whatnot. So, or you could just run as an independent. There's nothing stopping you from running as an independent, other than being able to pay the fee to like nominate yourself as a candidate. There might be like at least a little bit extra in terms of like paperwork, but yeah, it's different from registering as a political party, because political parties can get deregistered for not having enough members. Like United Australia Party at one point got deregistered because it just sort of fell apart, and then it just, I don't know, did some promotion and got re-registered later on. Yeah, you need people. Even if there is only one person who runs as a candidate, you still need support outside of that before you even begin to get yourself on the ballot. Wasn't NT also run by New South Wales? Possibly. New South Wales used to... Didn't New South Wales used to be like the entire East Coast or something? I don't know. Yeah. New South... Territories tend to be administered by... Like, they can make laws... No, I was about to say something and I'm like, what did I already say this half? How did I start this sentence? And I don't know what the connecting part would have made sense. Western Australia, for example, can make laws that affect Christmas Island, but that is a non-self-governing territory. So there would be territories near New South Wales that New South Wales might be able to have legislative power over and provide services for, but not the ACT or Northern Territory, because this is self-governing. Yeah, anyway, am I excited about the fact that we will likely see a referendum between the Voice and becoming a republic? I am excited. The last referendum we had was on a republic, and also a preamble to the Constitution in 1999. I was 7. Zero memory of that. I think that, like, elections, for example, are thrilling. I love them. They're like the grand final for massive sports fans. And I'm not a massive sports fan. Like, I look at the screen and I have live election coverage on ABC, and I'm like, and like it's a great time for people to like get passionate about something. And so yeah, I am so excited to witness a referendum, like in the flesh, something that's happened quite infrequently in Australian history. 44 in the past 121 years. 8 of which have passed. So everyone remember that, right? That even if you are for the yes vote on either of these things and you think, oh yeah, people will probably agree with me. No. Statistically, they won't. Or statistically, not enough of them will. Also, like, a counterpoint, yes, if you are for the no vote, also don't be complacent, because the yes people are going to be like, well, I've just been informed that victory is not guaranteed. I will also be very passionate and campaign about this. And then if you're very passionately no, you're like, oh, well, that's just how democracy works. But that's going to be deeply interesting and fascinating. The last referendum on the Republic, like, there were 2 main bodies for like the yes and no, and they got like funding to help with their advertising campaign, and there was like a little bit of a central element to that. The plebiscite, I don't think had that. I think it was just an all for one and one for all, everyone do whatever kind of thing, which was toxic and terrible, let's be honest. And I am a bit concerned about the toxicity of the Indigenous Voice to Parliament no campaign. That's not going to be the fun part. But like, hopefully there will be some very dedicated, informative, centralized information about like what this is about, what is the point, why should we have it, why shouldn't we have it, and have that as a good central thing, instead of what we had with the plebiscite, which is, again, just anyone just yelling yes or no, and saying some horrible things. There will always be horrible things said, unfortunately. I'm not excited about that, but I'm excited to see a referendum in action. I've never seen constitutional change in my life. It's never happened in my life. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I don't know. Let's see. I look forward to learning more about the specifics of the proposals, and yeah, learning about that, making a video about that, coming to some interesting decisions about it. Yeah. Okay. The third chamber in the tricameral system is me. Just me. Just some white dude. I will sit in a room, read every single piece of legislation, argue with myself, and do very little work. Yeah, that's like the Governor-General. No, the Governor-General is not actually a third chamber. Governor-General is, constitutionally speaking, part of Parliament. Even though they do not sit in the parliamentary chambers, they are constitutionally part of Parliament, part of the legislative power. They are not actually the legislative branch of government. They are the executive, and they give power to the legislative branch, but also constitutionally the Governor-General is allowed to do 4 things, one of 4 things. Give royal assent, bam, that's the one that almost always happens. The other one, just refuse. Just say no. That almost never happens and hasn't in like literal decades. The other one is reserve royal assent for His Majesty's pleasure, which basically is, I'm not touching this. We'll see what the King says. That's happened like 12 times or 15 times in like Australian history. And the other one is to send it back with proposed amendments, in which the House can do as it so pleases with those amendments, which almost always has been, yeah, okay, we'll agree with these amendments, send it back for royal assent. One time they're like, no, actually we don't agree with these amendments, and just sent it back. They're allowed to just disagree with the Governor-General. So the Governor-General technically has sort of legislative power, but not quite, because the Governor-General can't pass legislation on their own. They can just suggest ideas for legislation, and then as the executive is the one that has final say on the decisions of the legislature, but in practice, just says yes on the advice of Prime Minister and Cabinet, or Premier and Cabinet if we're talking about state and governor. Yeah. Well, what do I think of Labour's chances in the New South Wales state election? I don't know, that's too far away. It's so far away. Wait, is that March? That's not March. Wait, when is it? It's next year. Is it late next year? I don't know. Lots can happen in a few months, you know? Like, Liberals in Victoria, for example, have done really poorly in a lot of polls. I checked them recently. They're gaining. They are gaining on Labor in, like, the past, like, couple of weeks. They are not going to do as poorly as the Liberals did in WA. Absolutely not. They might increase their seats as opposed to lose a bunch. They might also still lose a bunch, but they might also still do poorly. But, like, yeah, things change in months' time. Like, you know, the federal election. You know, if it had been 6 months prior, COVID would have been a massive thing. Scott Morrison would have had to field off a lot of attack ads about, like, not ordering vaccines, not enough, or, like, doing it way later than a bunch of other countries, and all these sorts of things that would have made really easy attack fodder for him. But the election wasn't fought mostly on that. Like, voters move on. Or, I mean, depending on the voter, some people, like, really stick down on, like, things that happened months ago or even years ago under separate governments. So it's hard. It's really difficult to predict something like several years in advance. Several months in advance. Do I want to explain why is David Pocock technically a member of his own political party for Senate ballot purposes? Good question. I don't know why he did that. I suppose it's like, I don't know, to avoid being, like, grouped in any way, like maybe some recognition, not being in a grouped part of the ballot. Good question. Also, it gives the David Pocock actually fielded 2 candidates, including himself. I believe there was actually a second person as part of David Pocock team. What is the party actually called? I did a whole video where I mentioned this, but there was actually a second person. Just like the Jackie Lambie created, like, the Jackie Lambie Network. I was about to say alliance, and got a second senator elected. So in the future, if he continues, like, because the Senate has a half election every 3 years. The Senate term is 6, unless you're a senator from a territory. So in 3 years, actually, David Pocock is going to be up for a re-election anyway. It's going to be like, well, you know, like, Jackie Lambie Network is like, well, 6 years' time, Jackie Lambie will be up for re-election, but the people who support her won't be able to vote for her in the half election where she's off. So if she gets a second person as part of her party, then they can vote for that person. And so all the support for Jackie Lambie, in theory, could get that person re-elected, and then you've got this rolling support where, like, you've only got enough for one quota, but you've got 2 candidates that aren't competing with each other to get more than one quota. And this is how One Nation gets 2 senators in the Senate, is because Pauline Hanson gets just enough to get the last Senate place and rolls over to the half election, and Malcolm Roberts gets, you know, just enough to get that last Senate place. It doesn't really work very well in the ACT, because you don't take advantage of that, because your term is half as short. So I don't know why David Pocock did that at all, unless he wants to run people outside of ACT as part of his team and grow something larger, like, you know, the Jackie Lambie Network or the Nick Xenophon team. Yes. Oh gosh, yes. Referendum require a majority of the population and a majority of the states. Yes. So more than half of people in at least 4 states have to vote yes, and at least more than half of people in the voting population of Australia as a whole, which now includes territories as of 1977, also have to vote yes for it to pass. So you can get more than half of Australia voting yes for an idea, but that could only amount to 3 out of 6 or even 2 out of 6 states. Don't know. Yeah. And yeah, referendum wouldn't pass. So referendum are difficult to pass. Designed to be that way because it is the way that the government changes the constitution, which changes what powers it has and how like Parliament can function and be created. So it's like, this is the way that we make sure governments don't make bad decisions to give themselves more and more power, is to make it a high bar of entry for that kind of change, but also then makes it so like referendums that are so close can still fail, but that's how it works. And we had a referendum to change that, and it failed. So the public has decided in the past several decades to keep it that way. We have not only did we have referendums to create the constitution originally in every single state, that we've had a referendum since then on that sort of clause. So yeah. Gosh, okay, I'm going to try and catch up. Thoughts on different models for republic, parliamentary democracy, first, popular elected president, blah, blah, blah. I really mumbled that. Thoughts on different models of a republic. I don't like the American system. Let's be honest. Who does? I don't even think Americans like the American system. That's thankfully not the thing that is being presented, probably. I can't say that for certain, but that is not a popular thing. Basically, right, a republic is where our head of state is not a monarch. So basically right now, our head of state is King Charles III. And when King Charles III dies, it'll be King William. Right? Yeah, he's the eldest. And the republic is a system that is not that. So in 1999, the idea was that the Governor General, who is appointed by the king, is no longer appointed by the king. Get rid of the monarch. Whoop. And then we have the Governor General, who now acts as president, who actually is our head of state and does the functions of the Governor General, with a few slight tweaking to do with appointment by a majority of Parliament instead of just by the Prime Minister. So it would actually make the Prime Minister less powerful, but only slightly, in that it just prevents them from being able to assign whoever they want as president. So it's like, oh, well, it's not democratically elected. It was like, well, I mean, you're democratically electing the people who are going to appoint the person, and also you don't democratically elect our head of state now anyway. So for some people, it's like, well, that's not different enough. Why would we bother changing it? And for some people, they're like, but like, I do want to be able to democratically elect the president, like, directly. That doesn't need to be like a president system like in the US. Like, again, there are so many other models. Like Ireland and France. France has a prime minister and a president. Like, I think the Australian Republic movement currently wants to have like a sort of semi-directly elected forward as a candidate instead of just everyone being able to put up their hand. Like, it's, but then also, like, what does the president do? Like, are they mostly ceremonial? Like, the Governor General, in theory, has a few constitutional powers but aren't exercised except for in the rarest cases possible, like the dismissal. Though, like, Malcolm Fraser, who benefited from the dismissal, actually said on the 1999 referendum that had we had the system that the 1999 referendum proposes, there wouldn't have been the dismissal, because like, Kerr's fear was that he would get fired, and Whitlam, as the Prime Minister, would be able to nominate whoever he wanted to become Governor General, who then would not fire him. But in the 1999 parliamentary appointment model, Whitlam wouldn't be able to just pick and choose who he wanted. He would have to, like, if he was to pick a political party lackey as some favour, he wouldn't be able to get it past Parliament, because they would have to collectively decide that. which would have given Kerr a lot more stability. He would have been less worried, and he probably would have spent a little bit more time talking to the relevant minister, the Prime Minister, as this is constitutional monarchical role, and we probably would have had a half Senate election instead of a dismissal. The US style president has like executive orders that can only be vetoed by like a 2/3 majority of Congress, whereas like other presidential systems don't have that. So I think a lot of people's fear about a presidential system is simply just looking at the US and being like, when that's not how it has to be at all. Like, we could have such a range of like governor general as president does exactly as they do now versus like all sorts of range of things, and really we can all hypothesize about different ideas and models, but I'm just interested to see what gets proposed in the future, and then look at that, understand that better, and come up with an opinion on that. Okay, trying to catch up. If we become a republic, will we still be invited to the Commonwealth Games? Yes. The Commonwealth Games. So the Commonwealth realms are like 15. Is it 16 or is it 15 countries that have King Charles III as the head of state? Right. That is Britain and its colonies, former colonies, really. And then there is the Commonwealth of Nations, which is like 50, 60 countries, most of which are former colonies of Britain, most of which are republics, some of which are still monarchies, just not monarchies with the British monarchy. They got rid of the British monarchy and got their own from their own nation. So the Commonwealth Games are games with the Commonwealth nations. So we are not leaving the Commonwealth if we become a republic. We are leaving the Commonwealth realms that have King Charles III as the head of state if we were to become a republic. I say if, because it's not guaranteed. Like I said, most referendums fail. And also, who can predict what the country will want in years' time and what model will actually be proposed, and if it is one that is good or bad. Well, really, it's just likable or not. Anyway. We are not going to adopt the Electoral College, Dan. No. Thank you for complimenting the Fairy Bread shirt. It's a present from my wife. We don't need to change our name if we became a republic. Perfect Cipher. There's a Commonwealth somewhere in like the United States. Like the Commonwealth of blah 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 is like the full name of like a state or something. I can't remember where. But yes, nothing actually needs to change other than the head of state to become a republic. Our flag doesn't need to change. Fiji has been a republic since like 1980 or the 1980s. They still have the Union Jack in their flag. Hawaii, their state flag has the Union Jack. They've never been I don't think they've ever been subject to the British Empire or British Commonwealth. We can keep the flag as is, or we can change it. We can change it as an entirely separate issue before we become a republic, or if we don't become a republic, we can still change the flag. These are two separate things. Lots of things are separate things. Okay. Okay, yes, Saber has just said the same thing as I have. Can I explain the dismissal? Okay, yes. I'm going to try and make this real simple. Okay, so basically, right, Gough Whitlam, Labour. He has a majority in the House of Representatives, so he gets to be government. But Labour didn't form government for 23 years. Like the coalition, Liberals are very much like, this is what we're meant to do, right? We're the ones that are meant to be in government. But there's two chambers and things have to pass in both chambers. So the Senate was not controlled by Gough Whitlam. It almost never is controlled by the government, but Liberals had enough seats to make it really difficult. And then I believe like a Labour senator died, and it was up to the state, because it's the state's chamber, to put forward someone, and the Nationals Premier of Queensland, was, I always butcher his last name. Where, which of my many shelves is he on? I don't know. Something Joe Peterson. Anyway, yeah. Put forward like a senator that was not pro-Labor, and basically, Labor, the government every year has to pass an appropriation bill to fund government stuff. You can only introduce a supply bill in the House of Representatives. It can pass there. The Senate has to approve things. It blocked it. And Malcolm Fraser was like, go to an early election, or we won't pass this. And Gough Whitlam was like, I don't want to do that. I want to continue governing as I want to, because, you know, we've literally just had an election. Like, he got elected in 1972. There was an election in 1974. It's 1975. We're reaching a point where it's like, if we don't pass a supply bill, things are going to get really bad, because things are going to start falling apart. And so Gough Whitlam's idea is like, I know if I have a half Senate election, right, that might resolve this impasse. We might have a better Senate that could pass this bill, and then we can go to an election later, right? We can just get this moving. Whereas John Kerr, the Governor General, did not like Labor, did not like Gough Whitlam, thought, you know, oh, this creepy socialist, he might try and fire me. He wrote so many letters to Buckingham Palace, all of which were responded to by Sir Charteris, the Queen's private secretary. So Professor Jenny Hocking, who wrote a book about the dismissal, she went to the High Court to get access to John Kerr's letters and the Palace's letters back and forth on the subject. Like, she argues this is like a shield. Of course, Charteris like let the Queen know, even if she did not comment directly, and then pull something. Oh, I've got like a different book. What's his name? I think Troy Branston and the other guy from the Australian wrote that, like, look, clearly this shows that the Queen never wrote a letter to comment on this. Of course, she didn't know. The Queen wasn't involved. That's a contentious thing. Anyway, basically, Charteris advises Kerr that he has access to the reserve powers, that he can dismiss a prime minister if he so chooses, right? He does this by giving him advice based off the constitutional expert understanding from a Canadian constitutional expert, not an Australian one. They don't have that works the same way as ours. So didn't understand or acknowledge the idea of a half election in the Senate. So Kerr is, based off advice from Buckingham Palace, decides that he has the power to dismiss Whitlam, and just double checks to make sure this isn't going to embarrass the Crown, right? And then, not 5th of November, 11th of November, sorry, I think I said that wrong earlier, Whitlam goes to Governor General to advise calling for a half Senate election to resolve this impasse, because the Liberals are not going to pass this bill. They're not going to. And that's going to cause so many problems. And before he can do that, Gough Whitlam dismisses him. Sorry, John Kerr dismisses Gough Whitlam. And Whitlam thinks it's a joke, goes back to the House of Representatives, at which point Malcolm Fraser emerges from another room into Kerr's office, gets appointed Prime Minister, goes back to the House of Representatives, and announces to everyone, I'm the Prime Minister now. Labour immediately goes in an uproar, passes a motion of no confidence against him. The Speaker adjourns the House to go to Kerr's office. Kerr's secretary bars him from entry. Kerr dissolves Parliament. The motion of no confidence never arrives to the Governor-General. An election happens, and Liberals win in a landslide. A massive landslide, to the point where not only do they have a massive margin in the House of Representatives, the Liberals control the Senate as well. They can pass whatever legislation they want without Labour. It's another 7 years before Labour gets back in. Whitlam, he got dismissed by John Kerr. a real poor reception from Labour members for the rest of his life. He resigned early from the position, even though there isn't a term limit. It's more like 5-ish years. He resigned early. He went to London because people were just mean to him in public all the time. They would shun him in the halls of Parliament if they saw him. Like, he was not a popular man. Basically it was that the Liberals were just blocking a supply bill. The Liberals, if a government wants to introduce a bill and cannot pass it in the Senate, that's not normally an issue. Like, many bills just get stopped, but the lower house is where you control government funds, but the upper house is where you can block the spending of that government funds. And if you can't control money, then it all falls apart. That's the budgeting you need to get passed in some form. And that is centrally what the dismissal was about. To resolve that deadlock, call an election, and just create a new parliament that, in time for it to be able to spend money and continue funding government ordinances and stuff. Yeah. Oh, gosh. I don't even recall where I was up to at this point. Anyway, okay, it seems that they're having an argument in the comments about something. That's not a question. Piplup, yes. There's a Piplup there. Whoop. And there goes another Pokemon. I have a bunch. Everywhere. Here. There's a Jigglypuff and a Pikachu, and I can't rearrange it. It's all going to fall down. Which journalist do I prefer? Oof. That's a good question. Which journalist do I prefer? Oh no, my Apple Pay has been temporarily suspended and I should totally click on this link. I don't have Apple. What was I saying? Which journalist do I prefer? Good question. Matilda Bosley is fun. I'm not just saying that because we're mutuals on TikTok. I don't know. It's I can't say Alexander Scott, which none of you have heard of, because he's just finished. He is no longer a journalist. He's a friend of mine that I've known for like 10 years at this point. He works in he does work in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. He fucking carried that newspaper, that regional newspaper. He was robbed in the recent media awards. Just, oh my goodness, Atlas writing half of the actual paper. It was absurd. Shout out to Alex Scott in Pilbara region of Western Australia as the real MVP of journalists in rural areas. Phenomenal. Yeah. Neat. Nah, it wasn't the CIA. No, sorry. CIA, well, I don't believe that the CIA was involved in Whitlam's dismissal. The Liberals did that by themselves. They didn't need the CIA to do that. Which Pokemon would I elect to Parliament? Mr. Rhyme. Nah, Mr. Rhyme has a peerage in the House of Lords. Just look at him, he's a fancy lad. Mewtwo, but post the finale of the first movie, where he gains the understanding of how important individual perspectives and ideas are, and doesn't want to enforce his dominance and power over others. I'm not actually familiar with Mr. Mitchell's History of Australian Prime Minister series. No. Yeah. Which Pokemon would you put into federal parliament, huh? Yeah, I mean, obviously, Mewtwo can talk. Can Mr. Rhyme talk? How many Pokemon can talk? Isn't Isn't Lapras meant to be able to? According to a Pokedex or something? I mean, we can't elect Meowth. He's a bad guy. Okay, well, don't fight with me over... Okay, no, Lapras has the ability to develop telepathy to understand human speech, but I don't think that they can talk themselves. I don't know. Also, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not better. Pokemon is the best. Pokemon is the best card game. Also, by the way, it's fun and easy to learn as opposed to Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is deeply confusing and too complex, so take that. Yeah. How many people are actually watching? I have no clue whatsoever. What should I do for the next 3 years? You know, what shall I be talking about for the next... 720 Pokemon? Come on, you're well behind. There is 1,008. There's 1,008 Pokemon. And if you look up Pokemon number 1,000, Goldengo, I think it is, ugly as sin. Terrible Pokemon. Absolutely terrible. Oh my goodness. Like, no spoilers. You have to go and look at Pokemon number 1000. Absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible. 21 people currently watching. That's significantly less than I expected, but oh well. That's fine. Honestly, if there were way more questions, I wouldn't be able to answer them all. I am habitually terrible at this. Yes, thank you, Saber. You've Googled Goldengo, haven't you? Yeah, that's right. It's bad. Yeah, I'm just going to let everyone else take a moment to Google Pokemon number 1000 and just be terrified of it. Just look at it. Auspol Subway Enthusiast. Wow, thank you, Dan. That's great. That's so good that you've done that. Yeah. Anyway, I've been really enjoying Pokemon Scarlet or Violet. No, I have Scarlet. It's very good. Minus all the bad parts. Yes. World Cup thoughts and winner? Is there... I mean, Ash won the Pokemon World Cup recently, didn't he? Good on him. He's finally the very best that no one ever was. Good on Ash. I love Pokemon. And yeah, look, I also... sorry, Perfect Sci-Fi. I also do not have as much time as I would like for Pokemon because I too am reading lots about politics and don't have the time. Which is why, after this, I'm going to go play Pokemon. That's what I'm going to do. It's going to be great. It's going to be fun. And wonderful and beautiful. And I'm going to catch myself a Mimikyu, if that is available in Scarlet. I don't know if it is. It's definitely in Violet. I hope it's not, like, specific to only one, because I want it. I love Mimikyu. Yeah. What? The top 3 things about my wife. She's great. She's very creative and talented. She's incredible. She loves collecting rocks. We have lots of very beautiful rocks. I've learned lots about rocks. And she's way funnier than me. She is incredibly hilarious. And I love her for that. She's great. We got married 2.5 years ago. In the corner of her backyard where no one was allowed to attend because it was March 2020. and it was very much like every couple of days the restrictions get tighter and tighter, and we're like, we don't know when this is going to change or stop. So we had a little legal ceremony, and recently we had our big party ceremony where we've already done legal paperwork, but actually have guests that could fly in from overseas, and interstate, and have a venue and a reception, and it was wonderful to get married twice to the same person. It's I wouldn't recommend organizing 2 weddings because it is stressful and time consuming and costly, but re-experiencing the joy of getting married to a person, and having them walk down the aisle to you and getting to celebrate that twice is really nice. It was really lovely. I also understand why, like, people in their like 40s, 50s and older, they're like, second or third wedding, they're like, we'll just do it a really small one, like maybe we'll just do it in the park and not have like a big reception, and just have a picnic with friends. Like, I totally understand why people do that now, because it's like, this is a lot of effort and time, and it's really stressful and time consuming and costly. Like, if I were to recommend to you what to do with your wedding, just be chill, make it small, unless you've really want it not to be small, or have the money to hire someone to take over a lot of the responsibility. Yeah. Yeah. The cardboard cutout in the background, it's life-size cardboard cutout of Bernie Sanders. I, years ago, as a joke, bought a life-size cardboard cutout of Bernie Sanders, US presidential candidate, off eBay for way too much money. And a few years ago, I looked back, I looked up, like, how much does this cost? Half the price of what I bought it is what they're selling it for now. If you want another one, if anyone wants a cardboard cutout of Bernie Sanders or anyone else, they're probably less expensive than when I first bought him. There's nowhere for him to be, but he's very useful on Halloween, because we just sort of put him like behind a corridor, like in the dark, like just outside the toilet, and guests just walk a bit. Whoa! It gives him a little fright. It's cute. Yeah. So, your nana had an irrational hatred for Arthur Calwell. Was that the immigration bloke? Interesting. Arthur Calwell made a joke once, 2 wrongs don't make a right, or something. He meant it to be very humorous, and has since been taken out of context. And it was a comment on immigration. Like, he was for loosening the restrictions on like Asian immigration. Arthur Calwell was he was the Labour leader in the 60s. He was the Labour leader before Gough Whitlam. He also nearly got assassinated. Not for anything that he did, just the dude was angry, had a gun, and wanted to shoot someone, and Arthur Calwell was there. He shot him through a car window, which deflected the bullet. Then the guy apologized to Arthur Calwell, sent him some letters in prison, and he sent some letters back, and I believe forgave him, which is an odd little twist of events. But I'm not sure what specifically about immigration your nana was thinking of, or what you're thinking of. Who knows? I believe at that point in time in Labour's history, I believe they wanted to loosen or get rid of the White Australia policy that had been in place since pretty much the start of Australian federal government, where it was very restricting on who could come in, because they wanted to make sure that Australia was white. It wasn't specifically about like race of or colour of your skin in the legislation, but the trick was that someone could give you a dictation test as an immigrant in any European language, and if they like, oh, you're white enough, they give you a dictation test in English, and you're like, oh, wow, you've passed, and you're like, you look too brown. They would give you a dictation test in Polish, and then you would fail. That was the point. Caldwell, Labour was actually an advocate initially for it. Everyone, not everyone, but the three main political parties that we had in the start of Federation and Australian federal government were for the White Australia policy, but Labour was an advocate for getting rid of it by the time of Arthur Cowell's time. Though we ended up seeing the end of it, well, the end of formally what it was called. What was it actually called? Something immigration. I can't remember what it was actually called. White Australia policy was not the name of the actual legislation, but we saw a decline of the restrictions under Harold Holt, the Liberal Prime Minister, and that was possible because Robert Menzies finally stood down after being Prime Minister for like 16 years in a row or something like that. Yes. Robert Menzies was a good old fan of the White Australia policy. He thought it was fine. He actually tried to use it multiple times to stop people that I don't know if he'd used it multiple times, but he definitely tried to utilize it as a way to stop people that he did not like coming into the country. And so that is in part the basis of the Prime Minister was a spy, a conspiracy theory book in the 80s that said that Harold Holt was a Chinese communist spy because he was pro-Asian immigration, and that's such a tenuous thing, when really it's just people move on and their social attitudes change, and when you're Robert Menzies, who's been in the same position for 16 years, that kind of stagnates who gets a big say in championing certain policies, and simply just refreshing who is in the party and getting rid of Menzies just meant that the Liberal Party, even though they adopted it as party policy later than Labour, had eventually caught up to Labour on this particular progressive social issue for the time of being like, hey, let's not have as strict immigration policies as before. And then again, going further forward in time, Malcolm Fraser, Liberal Prime Minister, also helped with Asian immigration, specifically with like Vietnamese refugees because of Vietnam War. So after Arthur Cowell's time, but we can see how like party policy and social attitudes changed over time. Yes. Real politics question. Oh no, it's just gone away. Why do Christmas and the Cocos killing the islands vote in Lingari when it would make more sense for them to vote in Durack? Good question. So an electorate, the area, right, that we vote for a person in the House of Representatives, cannot cross state borders. Can't cross state borders. Whereas territories are administered by the Commonwealth. They can do what they want in terms of providing them political representation. And so because there is so few people in they don't get their own seat, because there's not 100,000 people who live on Christmas Island, and the nearest territory that has any comparable population to what is required to create a seat is the Northern Territory. So because they are territories, they get lumped together in terms of, voting for the Senate and the House of Representatives for that territory. So like Jervis Bay and New South Wales is pretty small. I think it's got like 400 people, 300 people. It's part of the ACT, part of one of the ACT electorates, because otherwise you can't have an electorate cross state boundaries, which it would have to do if it was to cross into a territory. So territories can be thousands of kilometers apart, but if they're one has enough people for a seat, the nearest one to it gets to vote in that seat. That is not ideal, admittedly, but also like these people need to be able to vote in some way, and this provides them with a vote. Not the most ideal vote, admittedly, but the system would require even if the Christmas Island people voted in a West Australian electorate, it still like is not an area that they live in, but it is probably a little bit closer. I think to change that, you might have to change the constitution. Don't quote me on that one. Double check that one. Yeah, so the answer might be because it would require constitutional reform, which is not easy. So this is the simplest, easiest solution, even if it's, though, not perfect. Thank you for coming up with Sam asks, red or green apples? I'm allergic to both. Satire, how much trouble can you really get in for stealing, I'm just going to say core flute signs in general, doesn't have to be party specific, and cutting the words up and rearranging them to make silly slogans, and putting them back where you found them. Close bracket satire. I don't know. That counts as property damage and theft, and that might depend. I don't know if that. I don't think that's included in any federal legislation. That might be state by state legislation as to what punishments there would be for vandalism or theft, or potentially. I'm not sure. It's also a very difficult thing to enforce, and I'm not aware of people actually being punished for vandalism to core flutes. Not to say that that's not possible, but I understand the legislative process. I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot advise you on specific laws. So, in this satirical hypothetical situation that's never ever happened, I cannot advise you, which is perfect, because this is satire and you've never done that, and I'm not encouraging you to do that. I'm actually not encouraging you to do that. Neat. What are people's thoughts on should there be no political parties? What are people's thoughts on should there be political parties? Look, you're going to get factions. If no political parties existed, you will still get factions. Political parties are just a formal way of making sure that people with similar views have a structure and recognizable way of supporting, coming together, and promoting those views. Pre-federation, many states didn't have political parties. Some of them actually did start forming political party structures. Like before Federation has always had political parties, but like the first few premiers of a lot of states were independents. John Forrest in WA, for example, was premier. He did not have any political party for the entire time that he was premier. He did join one when he went to the federal parliament in 1901, but you basically just had a pro-Forrest faction, like conservative members who thought that he would do a good job as premier, and so they were collectively called the ministerialists, even though they weren't a party. They had a name, they weren't a party. They weren't all ministers either. They're just Forrest, as the premier, got to choose the cabinet, which is the ministers. Therefore, those who supported the faction of Forrest are ministerialists. So you're still going to get people aligning themselves in some way, because that's just the natural way that people gravitate, because people will have similar ideas naturally. You're going to have disagreements. In a non-party structure, it makes it a lot easier to have those disagreements, because there's no party structure to punish or enforce any kind of party rules for you crossing the floor in a division vote. You wouldn't be crossing the floor in a division vote to vote against your party if your party doesn't exist. The interesting thing about the ministerialists is that those who were against Forrest, the anti-Forrest faction, were called the oppositionists. And Forrest was premier for nearly 11 years. And when the oppositionists then won the next election, they got a majority. And once Forrest had left, they were still called the oppositionists. the opposition was known as the ministerialists, even though the oppositionists were not in opposition anymore. It didn't make sense. They got rid of it after 1911. That's right, it stuck around for a whole other decade. You're still going to get like nicknames and factions. Like even like now with like the Teal Independents, they're not a political party. They do not have to vote with each other. They don't necessarily share all the same views. They have, you know, a collective sort of similarity in their climate focus, but they will have individual disagreements on the specifics of that climate focus and action. We're still collectively calling them Teal Independents for having some sort of shared value and shared political donor. So political parties don't need to exist. And even if they didn't, we would still come up with groupings, we would still categorize people, we would still have factions that could sometimes function in an analogous way to a party would in some circumstances, like, you know, voting together as a group. You could expect probably on climate-related legislation that a lot of Teals might vote the same way. Not necessarily, just as you could expect the ministerialists of the forest government to vote in line with forest. Not always, but it's fascinating because that's just how people are, really. That doesn't mean that that's not like a sort of, what's the point? Might as well have a political party kind of view, but it's just like a fascinating thing for those who think like, how would it work? Well, yeah, it would just continue to work because it did work beforehand. So long as more than half the chamber votes for something, that is what makes or breaks it. A party is just a simplified way to demonstrate that you have the numbers to pass a piece of legislation. It is not a guaranteed way that you would have the numbers to pass a piece of legislation, because people can vote against the party. It's just a formal way of doing that and demonstrating that in advance, as opposed to everyone's an independent, even if we can reliably consider the likelihood of legislation passing. It's not a guarantee. Yeah. Okay. Whoop. And then someone has just said, we have to have parties. Nah. To be fair, yeah, Sam Martin does make a good point about Israel having just a lot of political instability. That's not necessarily the reason. That's not necessarily because they have lots of minor parties. There's always, like, you know, some sort of socio-political underlying reason as to why Israel has had so many, what is it, like 3 elections in 4 years or something ridiculous, and no one can form a majority. There's a bit more of an underlying issue there, other than they have lots of minor parties. They have a lot of minor parties, but lots of European parliaments, for example, are very used to not having a single party have a majority. Australia is very much like, interestingly, not like a lot of parliaments around the world in that regard, in that we reliably have 2 parties back and forth forming majority. Like, some people are like, oh, hung parliament, and like, yeah, that's just how the voters voted. It's not inherently bad. It could be bad. It's just, it depends on how that hung parliament approaches this business, and who in that hung parliament is collaborative or not collaborative, because that's just how parliament is, and it is up to those parties to be good collaborators or managers with other parties, because they have to do that in upper houses anyway. So hung parliaments sometimes are good, sometimes are bad. It really depends. What are my thoughts on the rise of independence in our last election? It is a good example of how your vote matters. You know, people get disengaged if they don't support either of the major parties, or if a major party consistently wins as opposed to another. Like if you are a Liberal voter who lives in like Fremantle and you're like, Labor's just going to win this seat as they always have for 100+ years. Or if you're a minor party voter who's like, Labour or Liberal are just going to win the seat. I'd find that kind of political disengagement disheartening. And the rise of independence demonstrates that there can be a third option outside of upper houses where you get multi-member electorates. It is possible to get someone outside of the major parties into a lower house. And it doesn't need to be Greens. It could be the Greens. That's quite possible. But also, like, that's not to say that it's like down with the major parties. That's just more of demonstrating that like you have a voice and an option, and it really is just about like dedicated campaigning and finding a way to appeal to a large amount of people in an alternative way. And yeah, change can happen, and this also awakens major parties to what is important to such a large amount of people, because they're like, okay, well, a lot of our seats have now just been lost to this group of people that shared this sort of ideas and values. That's a genuinely serious warning sign that if they continue to ignore that, then they might lose more seats. It's democracy in action. It is people demonstrating what they want, and therefore it just is continuing the process of democracy, of people expressing what they want, and then people will be able to look at that and examine that and respond appropriately. So in the future, maybe major parties will adjust their policy to prevent independents from getting elected because they appeal to those voters, or maybe this will demonstrate to a bunch of other voters who otherwise did not really think outside of the two major parties to consider that option, and if they see that there is options that appeal to them outside of them, they go, oh, okay, now I can express myself in a more genuine way because I've looked at that, and I've got more engaged and examined and come to a realization that this reflects my views better. So it's good in many ways, because it just means that, it's just good for people to understand that their vote matters, and then also demonstrate in a very tangible way what is important to lots of people, and therefore will shape policy in the future. Yeah, so if a lot of minor independents that got elected on non-climate issues, and if something else that made them united, it would demonstrate the same thing. But no, climate change is the thing that has really united a bunch of independents in this particular election. So yeah, I don't know how that'll play out in the future, but it's interesting now. Will the Teals ever become an official party? I don't think so. But I mean, it's up to them. Like the Teals, each Teal could just create their own party. Like David Pocock is just one dude. He has his own political party. Jackie Lambie created the Jackie Lambie Network. We could see a prominent Teal create their own political party to try and field other Teals. They wouldn't have the same appeal as like being an independent, because then they would create their own party structure, but that would allow them to independently, collectively promote people that have like a big community standing and a similar goal in mind. So the Teals collectively are not a political party, and the Teals collectively are not going to form a political party. Individual Teal independents might create a small minor party, much like the Jackie Lambie Network or Bob Katter's Australia Party and whatnot. Like independents that have been around for long enough could then promote and support other people, get a leg up into Parliament and establish themselves in a way that political parties facilitate as structures. Interesting. Who do I think is better for Victoria, Dan or Matt? That is a decision for the voters. That is the decision for the voters, not me. I don't live there. I'm not going to tell you how to vote. You can't trick me into telling you how to vote. The decision on how to vote is up to you. Take that, Sam. It is the decision of the voters to decide who they want to be premier. Or if they want either of those people to be premier, they're entirely entitled to vote for independents, like we've just been discussing, minor parties as well. There could be a hung parliament, though really, to be a hung parliament that isn't controlled by Labour, you would need both a swing towards the Liberals and also a swing towards minor parties. Not impossible. There have been some large swings in the past. So, yeah. Up to you. I'm going to find out. We're going to find out. It's going to be so exciting. In less than 1 week, Saturday. Saturday is when the election is. So people are pre-polling now. People are sending in the postal votes. It's going to be really fun and interesting to find out. Watch a little bit on Saturday to see some of the things coming in, and get an indication of what the Legislative Assembly will look like in the future. What's my wish list on changes? Look, I'm not going to create a wish list. I am interested and excited, as I previously mentioned, to see what happens with the Indigenous Voice and the Republic referendum. I'm just really interested to learn more about the proposals, unpack that, and see what the arguments are and see what happens, because I just think that campaigns are fascinating. How is Australia a democracy when voters don't get to elect the leader of the country? How would it be a democracy if we did? That is a central tenet of parliamentary democracy in the Westminster style, that that ministers of state are dependent on the collective approval of Parliament in a way. They have to be able to command confidence in the lower house. So let's say that the Prime Minister, well, that would be a president if they're directly elected. Let's just say the entire country votes for just one person. Well, New South Wales and Victoria have most of the people. So New South Wales and Victoria would have most of the say as to who is the leader of the country. Whereas in a parliamentary democracy like we have currently, right, you get people from all across the country to collectively decide in their area who should represent that area. And then, democratically, that creates this big old average where, so let's say lots of people vote for Labour in New South Wales and Victoria in safe Labour seats, right? And they get collectively, Labour gets more votes than the coalition. But in a lot of more seats that aren't safe seats, the coalition wins by 1, 2, 3%, right? Should Labour be government because they got more votes, or should the coalition be government because they got more seats overall? The answer is the coalition, because more votes overall, but larger margins in specific areas don't represent the needs or desires of the community at large, the country at large. So the parliamentary democracy is democratic because it is creating 151 separate elections to create that averaging and representation of every part of Australia collectively, and then do it all over again with the Senate to represent proportionally a bunch of different views that won't necessarily get the concentrated population to get a seat in the lower house, and that comes together to create Parliament as a whole. So the decisions of the government are still examined and held to account by the Parliament as a whole. The government, by its very nature, almost never can get a majority that forms government, is beholden to the Parliament, and still, again, also the public, because when the election happens, they can be like, well, that's a terrible leader, and vote for a party that will not have that person as their leader. So it's incredibly democratic, and it's very democratic to have that as a system, because it is people voting in more than one way to create statistical averages in more than one way to represent a bunch of different people in more than one way to then come together to get that system where we have a prime minister who is a member of the House of Representatives and can be voted out in multiple ways, be that via the party or via the public in an election or via the public in that person's seat specifically. Yeah. Mr. Beat? Did you typo Mr. Beast, the most popular individual creator on YouTube ever? I'm sorry, that sounded a bit sassy. I don't know who Mr. Beat is, but I have heard of Mr. Beast. I've never watched a Mr. Beast video. I have no idea what he sounds like. I just I just know the classic YouTuber thumbnails are like, oh, I bought someone a house. I have so much money. I'm a YouTuber with 100 and whatever million subscribers. Make me have 100 million subscribers. No, that's unreasonable. I feel like the most I could ever aspire to is maybe 100,000. Like, that's the bare minimum to get one of those YouTube plaques. I would love that. Yeah. The shared equity for property. Oh, the help to buy. Wait, is that the? I've forgotten. Is that the name of the idea that Labour wants to introduce, where they? If that's the idea, is that okay? Is that the idea where that Labour has of where they help pay for part of the house, you share equity with the government. So collectively, because you are only paying off, say, like 75% of it, 50% of it, your interest repayments and monthly repayments are less because they're a smaller portion of that loan. But then, and you can choose to then pay off the rest of it and buy it fully back off the government. But if you don't, and when you sell it, the government gets share of capital gains. So it's a system that makes money for the government, and then also allows you to be more able to buy a home because it's more affordable for you. That is an interesting strategy. I wouldn't say it's the solution to housing affordability because it only addresses part of the issue of housing affordability. It definitely makes housing more affordable by its very nature, and it is like a scheme that pays for itself effectively because of that in the long run. But also it does nothing like collectively to the market to decrease housing cost overall. It just allows more people to get into housing in a more affordable way. So it's like a positive, but it's like housing affordability is a jigsaw puzzle, and this is only one of the pieces. It doesn't have to be the only piece, and there are ways that you could approach it that don't involve that piece at all. But that's not like an overall bad idea. It's just an incomplete one. But you can say that about anything to do with addressing the housing market, because it is, like I said, a jigsaw puzzle where everything's multifaceted and complex. So it's interesting. Yes, I will do videos on each referendum beforehand. I'll probably do more than one per referendum, because there's lots of complex things to do with referendums. So probably be like, okay, here's what it's about. Here's a follow-up one about like misconceptions. Here's one about like how you vote and the importance of voting and whatnot. And once again, I will be telling you the basics and what is factually relevant, not actually telling you how to vote, yes or no. Our system is different from the USA's electoral college system in many ways, but also like the Senate, right, is like each Senate has the same amount of people that represent each state, but the amount of people in each state wildly differs. So you've got this like malapportionment element of it, where like a vote in Tasmania is worth more proportionally to elect a senator than in New South Wales, and the Electoral College has a lot of smaller elements where, like, each state is smaller than in Australia because American states are tiny, but it gets to this way that, like, not each electoral college vote is proportional to the amount of people in that space compared to another space, because I believe, don't you get like, aren't the electoral college votes something like your amount of seats in the House of Representatives plus the amount of seats you have in the Senate? And each state has 2 senators, so if there's like a difference in population, that'll only account for a little bit of the difference in electoral college votes, but you've still got the same baseline. So very population sparse places still have extra proportion wise for electoral college. And then also electoral college votes are not direct, because there's electors that choose after the public has been like, this is the electoral college, this is who we're voting for, and then they decide where those electoral college votes go, which might be someone outside of the 2 main candidates for Republicans and Democrat presidential nominees. So you can potentially have a moment where like it's pretty even, but one person has slightly more electoral college votes, and then the system goes, well, the person who got less votes, like electoral college wise, well, some of us are going to like put our votes there instead, and make that person elected, which you could argue would work well and be okay if some of those electoral college votes evened out to reflect the popular vote, because the entire country votes for the president, and then you get this disproportional element where, again, more than half of people can vote for one person, but because they didn't live in the right spot, their vote doesn't count nearly as much, and it's just different. Not like so radically like the idea of malapportionment, like I said, exists in our system, like in the Senate, but you're not voting for one person, you're voting in a way that represents your state equally with another state, for the collective representation in an upper house chamber, as opposed to disproportionately disaffecting certain people and their vote collectively, for the country to vote for a single person who, separate to Congress, separate to the House of Representatives and the Senate, has legislative and executive powers, and their own legislative agenda as an individual. Different system. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to wrap up soon. I've been talking too long. I want to say hello to my wife, who's come home from work, and make her dinner if she hasn't had dinner yet already. So let's wrap up soon. What would I do in the trolley problem? I would kill 1 person over 5. I wouldn't feel good about it, but that is the obvious solution. And I will feel bad forever, but I will tell myself that I solved the trolley problem. Challenges that the Australian political system is facing. Good question. Don't know. What do you mean in that context? Mr. Beat is a good political educator in the US. Maybe he can help me understand the Electoral College better. I sure hope I explained it well. If I didn't, please forgive me. I am Auspol Explained, not USpol Explained. I'm sure there are things that I think about the America they could be. Yeah. If we had an expiry on our money and the government controlled the banks, would we get rid of taxes and international domestic trade? What? How would we have expiry on our money? And if the bank... I'm sorry, there's a lot of layers to that question that confused me, and I don't mean to be rude. A nationalized bank still needs to be funded somehow, which you would do probably through taxes, and well, you wouldn't need to have taxes on internal/domestic trade. We also don't have taxes on internal/domestic trade. That's the whole point of federation, is to get rid of interstate tariffs and also have a collective federal government to centralize and provide with specific powers, including that to do with external matters like external trade, external and foreign affairs that you could just collectively do via a central government, but you can't have interstate tariffs. Yes. Do I think the territory were to vote to become a state? Do you think that a territory should get equal amount of Senate seats in the original 6 states? I mean, ideally, yes. Like, that is the whole point of the Senate, is to provide equal representation for the states, regardless of how big or small they are. The problem is that was the decision made like 120 years ago when we didn't have the Northern Territory, and then it's like weird that like then if the Northern Territory gets 12 senators for a minuscule population, but the ACT as a territory still only gets 2, despite the fact that the ACT I think is actually larger than Tasmania in terms of population, or maybe it's approaching a comparable size. I can't remember, but like then it just creates this weird little disproportionate imbalance that is just unfair on the ACT. But the ACT constitutionally would have difficulty becoming a state because constitutionally it is enshrined that it has to have it is the space designed there to hold the nation's capital, which constitutionally has to be in a territory that has to then be at least 100 miles or more from Sydney in the Constitution, which you could resolve by shrinking the ACT down to just the parliamentary triangle. Technically, I think you'd still have to have a constitutional. Oh, would you have to have a constitutional referendum to change that? And then everything else that was the ACT is no longer the ACT. It is a state in itself, just the AC, I guess. Or you could just change it so the ACT gets more senators. It's just one of those weird things where like it's like, well, we did this, we built the system this way, and it's unfair if we change just one thing about it and let the Northern Territory have statehood and equal stuff. But also, like, again, they don't need statehood to have more senators, but then also like statehood would provide them with other constitutional protections enshrined in what powers the state has versus the territory. It's not just about statehood. The federal government is allowed to undo territory laws, which is not an often used power, but it's also like, territories don't have that constitutional protection. The federal government can't undo a state law unless it contradicts an existing federal law that is under the purview of Section 51 of the Constitution. So, like, there's more than one way in which a territory is different constitutionally to a state, and so the Northern Territory doesn't need statehood to have more senators, but it does need statehood if it wants to have other constitutional rights and protection. Federal government, yes. Anyway, I am going to head off. So thank you very much for coming to this stream and joining me. It's been a nice small one. Anyway, thank you very much. Saber says territories should be able to vote on euthanasia like the Northern Territory did in 1995. I thought it was 1996. Either way, the point that you are making is that territories don't have certain legislative powers. Normally, they would be able to do what they want within reasonable limits of what a state can do. But yes, the Northern Territory wanted to vote on euthanasia, voluntary assisted dying, and make that a law. Federal government didn't like that and made it so that they could not make that again. It is up to the federal government to allow that to happen. So yeah, that is the prime example, very much, of the Northern Territory not being able to make certain laws because the federal government said that it couldn't. Other than that, it can, so long as the federal government doesn't decide to do a repeat of that specific kind of instance, which it is constitutionally allowed to do. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the past 3 years. like, share, comment, and subscribe. Seriously. 3 years. It's been amazing. I've interviewed a bunch of different members of Parliament and whatnot. I was going to have one join in on this stream, but unfortunately scheduling did not work. I was going to have a special guest. Oh well, maybe for year number 4 we'll have a special guest of someone. Yes, and looking forward to what the next 3 years we'll see. We're going to have referendums in the next 3 years, or at least one referendum that I'm going to get to make videos on, and fingers crossed, interview a Prime Minister. Let's make it happen. Malcolm Turnbull's already said no to me. And Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd. Scott Morrison has not replied to his emails. I don't know if I ever reached out to Anthony Albanese. Paul Keating, haven't emailed him. John Howard, haven't emailed him either. Yeah, there's still hope. And of course, you know, if I beat Channel 6 News in terms of views and subscribers, maybe a Prime Minister will pay attention to me and come on the show. That is your not so subtle hint to share. It's not a competition with Channel 6 News. I think that's the fun little channel. And there's no way that I'm competing with Friendly Geordies. But then again, I'm an educational channel and he is a Labour commentary channel. So very different roles and audiences. Yes, but fingers crossed. Let's see if I can get an interview with a Prime Minister in the next 3 years. Let's go. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for this fun little celebratory thing. I suppose you didn't really get to see it for most of the stream, but I've been wearing this. It's my birthday badge. It's not my birthday, it's the channel's birthday. And I bought this as a joke for my wife's recent birthday, and then just forgot to pin it on her. So next year, I will remember when she turns 1 year older, she's also going to experience the joy of the birthday pin. Speaking of my wife, I'm going to go say hello to her and play some Pokemon. So thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye. And now comes the best part of the awkward just leaning over and turning the stream off.